and welcome to the SciFest Movie Talk episode. In this episode, I'll be discussing the 2015 Canadian science fiction dystopian action movie and comedy in so many respects, Turbo Kid, as directed by Frances Simard, Anouk Wissel and Johan Carl Wissel. Now, before I get started with my review, I just want to give an absolutely big shout out to Liam's Library for requesting this review through my YouTube channel. Liam's Library is another YouTuber offering some interesting takes on a number of movies and novels, particularly those by Joe Hill, Dean Kuntz, and indeed the master of horror himself, Stephen King. So, Liam's Library has been a long-time supporter of my channel. Indeed, he was actually one of my very first subscribers. So if you do have some time, please do check out the channel, absolutely. I will leave a link to the channel in the description below, and as always, I will leave a link to a Liam's Library video at the end of this episode. So, when indeed this film was requested, I was certainly intrigued, to say the least. I have said this before, but I have never heard of this movie, and indeed the name suggested to me, without even looking at it, it was going to be like Spy Kids, perhaps. One thing I can now safely say 100%, this is not at all like Spy Kids. Indeed, it may have kid in the title, but this is as far away as a kids film as any film could ever be, in any sense of that word. It is probably one of the weirdest movies I have actually reviewed on the channel thus far. It certainly had a very distinct appeal. It is very much going to be an acquired taste, and I'll get to that in a bit. But from a kind of morbid curiosity and a niche experience, I mean, I can't actually even say that I've ever watched a Canadian film before. So that was actually quite a unique adventure in itself. But ultimately, I must say that I really did thoroughly enjoy this film. It is set in an alternative dystopian 1997, which is futuristic in terms of the film's setting. We see the Earth as a barren wasteland, toxically, held in an everlasting nuclear winter. We meet the kid, as played by Munro Chambers, living in the wasteland on his own, scavenging to live, but keeping himself to himself for the most part, and totally fixated on a comic book character named Turbo Rider, when he unexpectedly meets the larger-than-life and constantly hyped Apple, as played by Lawrence LeBouf, who instantly befriends him and traces him back to his hideout. Apple seems a little different, to say the least, but reluctantly the kid allows her to stay, and thereafter the two do start to kind of form a fairly unique but heartwarming friendship, if a quite unconventional way. However, she is kidnapped and given to the local tyrant Zeus, as played by Michael Ironside, and so then kickstarting the kid's mission to save her, and ultimately then teaming up with the legendary arm wrestling cowboy Frederick, as played by Aaron Jeffrey, launch a last winner-takes-all, all-out assault on those who have caused him harm. So, where do I actually start with this one? So, from the beginning of this movie, there is a distinct retro vibe. It is a big part of the film's aesthetics, feeling very much like a mixing of, well, like a mixing pot, if you like, of 80s fashion, music, and action movies. It doesn't feature any 80s music, but the style of the soundtrack is excellently positioned to give that film kind of that retro vibe, along with some of the sound effects, which do feel like they've come straight from the Atari video game. In fact, at times, it feels like we're actually playing such a game, you know? But it is actually set in 1997, which I did actually find interesting from the point of view that such films, they kind of usually set in the future. This one was actually set in the past, and in one that seemed permanently stuck in the 80s, or at least the early 90s. But overall, it was the kind of film that you kind of could just watch, could imagine watching on VHS or indeed Betamax. I did mention earlier that this would be an acquired taste. However, and indeed the film is very surreal, with a very brutal concept. It is quite quirky. Indeed, quirky might not really do it justice. It is extremely different from most things that I have ever seen. But alone from this, the film is extremely graphic and magnificently gory. This is not going to be everybody's cup of tea. You know, if gore is not your thing, stay clear. Very clear. But if you're into buckets of the stuff and want a real no-holds-barred, unapologetic, yet totally cheesy kind of experience, then this really could be for you. The Blu-ray that I actually have and watched this on says that it is Mad Max on a BMX. And for the first time, boy, you know, that isn't actually wrong. It is very much inspired by the Mad Max series. But I would say it's kind of mixed with quite a bit of the outlandish nature of like the 1987 movie Masters of the Universe. Just to name a few, but if you kind of get that feel, if you can kind of imagine such an odd pairing. Because of the world in which they kind of live, there are no combustion engines, to what I could tell. And so the coveted mode of transport is the humble push bike. It is indeed quite the dystopian vision, for sure. Our protagonist may actually ride a BMX, which at least has got some sporting appeal. However, it is quite mad actually seeing the antagonists yielding their weapons on what technically classify as trikes. It seems extremely silly at first, this really, and I did cringe quite a bit, but the film really does actually manage to turn this around. And in the end, does actually present some pretty awesome sequences on the bikes, and indeed really makes the antagonists stand out and menacing enough, even quite disturbing. The characters in this movie are larger than life, and way over the top at times, and deliberately so, I'm sure. Especially Zeus and his buzzsaw-yielding maniac minion, Skeletron, as played by Edwin Wright. Absolutely outrageous and very outlandish. They are taken right out of the evil villain guidebook, you know? Apple is excellent too, and at first it is really hard to kind of get her character, I must admit, but as things kind of become clearer as the film progresses, it does actually start to make sense. And in that, I must say that Lawrence LeBoeuf gives an absolutely excellent performance, giving this character a real distinctive, if yet peculiar kind of edge. It has a very odd sense of comedy, extremely malaligned and dark for what it is, very morbid. The comedy comes more from the actual story and the effects that it has than kind of out-and-out laughs. It's certainly an odd one, for sure, in that respect. And kind of way over the top again. It is certainly a wild ride, you know, and that is for sure. I did, however, feel like a lot of the elements that we got were just kind of thrown together. It worked, given the unique way in which the film was kind of put together. And indeed, it was kind of supposed to be like a page from a comic book. I think that's kind of the idea that it was going for. Agreed. But that still didn't kind of stop it from feeling like it was a bit lazy with regards to kind of any kind of build-up with a number of the plot elements. I would say that it kind of made some of the plot points kind of feel quite corny and simply convenient. You might not quite see them coming, but there's hardly any earnest and earned shock value either in them. I must admit, though, that what at first did actually seem quite silly and stupid at times, it was really, really hard to quite take so seriously at the beginning. The film then really does kind of deliver quite ingeniously thereafter. Once we do start getting some of the rationale for the characters and the overall story kind of does start coming together, the film's purpose and its intent does become a little clearer. But no, it's not meant to be taken seriously at all. So, Overall, this is a film with a, very much a certain sense of its own adventure. It has a very quirky and a very unique vibe. I think it's about the oddest thing that I have watched to date for the channel. But you know what? I actually enjoyed, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was different, very different. And it actually made a refreshing change to watch something that, although so clearly copied from a series of other movies, to which I would like to think it was paying homage in its own kind of twisted way. It still had a very unique quality to it, and it wasn't afraid to speak out and stand its ground with its own style, which is loud and vibrant to say the least. It has some odd and offbeat moments, but I absolutely loved the soundtrack and the wacky way in which it uses extreme gore. It's a film that you just can't help but watch. I must admit that I was ready to switch it off after the first 5 minutes. That I'll be honest with. It seemed absolutely ludicrous. It took quite a while to kind of get used to its style for sure, but by the end, I was so glad that I persevered with it. If you're looking for something a lot different, and indeed lots and lots of gore and practical special effects, if but over the top and a very cheesy style, a film that's kind of totally off its head, but extremely, unadulterated, and this is definitely going to be for you. If not, stay clear again. Very clear. It is a film with kind of like an 80s core and an 80s kind of feel with its effects, with a millennial mentality, if you like. It is actually quite fun, if but an extremely gruesome and macabre comic book style adventure. But whilst at the same time being one of the more vibrant dystopian films I have ever actually seen. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. We have absolutely loved having here at Sci-First Movie Talk, and we would definitely love to have you back. But most of all, thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.